Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. 2007, two moments happening, worlds apart, really.
Right.
First, you've got Steve Jobs, black turtleneck, you know the scene, unveiling the iPhone in San Francisco. Big applause.
Total tech rock star moment.
Then, completely different vibe, halfway across the globe, a woman in Kenya, maybe just by the roadside, using a simple Nokia phone,
Yeah.
and she's sending money home. Just a few taps. It's called M-Pesa. No lights, no stage, but yeah.
And what's amazing, truly amazing, is that both those moments, they weren't separate things. They were like, the starting gun for this massive global telecom shakeup.
Exactly.
One was all sleek design, the future in your hand. The other, super basic tech, but wow, profoundly changing everyday life. Both just tore up the rule book.
You got it. And that's what this deep dive is all about. We're looking at the epic business rivalry between MTN and Orange in Africa, roughly 2000 to 2025.
It's a fantastic story. Boardroom clashes, huge policy shifts.
And how, billions of ordinary people making choices completely changed the game. It's real business drama.
And it wasn't happening in a vacuum, right? This African story was tangled up with everything else globally.
Yeah.
The smartphone wars, the explosion of mobile money, even things like GDPR in Europe or the whole 5G security debate later on. They all played a part in how MTN and Orange battled it out.
It's like this giant interconnected web, sometimes messy.
Definitely messy sometimes.
So settle in. We're going back to the early 2000s, the dial-up days almost. Then through the 2010s, the app decade, and into the 2020s with 5G promises and, well, more drama.
We'll see giants clashing in Europe, tech stars rising and falling in Silicon Valley, governments getting really nervous about networks.
And how all of that landed right in Africa, shaping strategies for MTN and Orange and changing lives.
So how did we get from just making calls on chunky phones to, well, your phone being your wallet, your TV, your everything? The early 2000s. That's where we need to start. And the big theme then, scale. Get big fast.
Absolutely. Early 2000s, mobile phones are shifting from like a luxury item to something everyone needs. And governments are finally loosening their grip on the old state-owned telecom monopolies. Markets are opening up. It's kind of the Wild West.
Grow or die, basically. And Vodafone, they really took that to heart.
Oh, yeah. Vodafone, their move on Mannesmann in Germany back in 2000, just incredible.
It was absolutely massive. A hostile takeover, $180 billion. That wasn't just buying a company. It was redrawing the map.
Instantly made them the biggest mobile player globally, right? Millions of customers across Europe, even into the U.S.
Huge statement.
Yeah.
But they weren't the only ones playing big. Telefonica, the Spanish giant.
Right, Telefonica. They were making moves too.
By 2005, they snapped up O2 in the UK. That cost, around $31 billion, gave them a major foothold in Britain and Germany, plus their huge base in Latin America.
It really was like a global land grab for subscribers.
And France Telecom, trying to look modern, they rebranded their mobile site as Orange. They weren't just thinking locally, they had global ambitions.
Okay, so let's bring it to Africa. While these European giants are duking it out, we've got MTN and Orange stepping into the ring there.
That's the core of our story here. MTN starts in South Africa, 94, then pushes north. Orange, leveraging its French connections, focuses heavily on Francophone West and North Africa.
And those early footprints really shaped their empires, didn't they?
Totally. Orange dominates in French-speaking Africa. MTN becomes the powerhouse in English-speaking regions and Southern Africa. And eventually, both end up operating in, 17 African countries each.
Which is just staggering reach for private telcos on the continent. Still pretty much unmatched.
Unmatched. But it wasn't just about buying companies. Remember those 3G auctions in Europe around 2000?
Oh, yeah, the Spectrum Gold Rush. Governments making billions.
Exactly. Vodafone, Orange, Telefonica, they all paid enormous sums for these licenses, basically betting the farm on faster mobile internet.
Spectrum being the invisible highway for your phone signal, governments deciding who gets to build on it.
And meanwhile, over in the U.S., a different kind of consolidation was happening. The baby bells, remnants of the old AT&T monopoly.
They started getting back together, like a weird corporate reunion.
Yeah, SBC buys AT&T and takes the name. Bell Atlantic merges with GTE to become Verizon.
Creating these two absolute behemoths. If another big merger had gone through then, AT&T and Verizon could have controlled 80% of the U.S. wireless market.
Yeah, regulators were definitely getting twitchy about that. Too much power in too few hands.
But even with these giants forming, the competition was fierce. Vodafone versus Telefonica in Europe, AT&T versus Verizon in the U.S., constant battles for customers.
Absolutely. But for you, the average person back then, your phone was still mostly for calls and texts.
Right, and those crazy high bills, they were starting slowly to come down, thanks to deregulation and more competition.
But here's a really crucial threat even back then. There was this growing global awareness. Telecom wasn't just business. It was, well, essential for development.
Like the World Summit on the Information Society, talking about the digital divide.
Exactly. And later, the UN's Millennium Development Goals and then the Sustainable Development Goals. They explicitly targeted universal, affordable internet access.
And that global mood definitely shaped how companies like MTN and Orange approached Africa. It wasn't just about selling airtime anymore.
No, they were becoming key players in national development plans, which, let's be honest, also represented a massive growth opportunity for them.
Okay, jump forward. January 9th, 2007, San Francisco, Steve Jobs, the iPhone.
Whoa, everything changes. Or at least starts to change very, very fast.
For the phone companies, it was complicated, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. A double-edged sword. AT&T got that exclusive U.S. deal, right? Suddenly, they had this flood of customers desperate for the iPhone.
While Verizon reportedly passed on it early on, ouch. Bet someone regretted that call.
You'd think so. But the real earthquake was Apple grabbing control. The hardware, the software, the App Store. Suddenly, Apple, not the carrier, owned the customer experience.
That was the birth of platform power, wasn't it? Apple's iOS, then Google's Android pops up in 2008.
And within 10 years, those two were running basically every smartphone on the planet, over 99%. The telcos became, well, almost like utility providers for these platforms.
The value shifted dramatically.
Yeah, the cool factor, the innovation buzz, it moved from the telco HQs to Silicon Valley campuses and customers. They stopped caring so much about voice minutes and just wanted data. Loads of data.
And did they ever? Smartphone adoption just went vertical, like 2011, maybe 10% globally.
Something like that.
By 2018, over a third of the world had one. Billions of people leapfrogging desktop computers entirely.
Which, of course, totally upended the telco's business models. Those reliable profits from calls and texts. Started to flatten out, then dip.
Data became king. Suddenly, it was all about the gigabytes. Unlimited calls and texts became almost standard by the late 2010s in many places.
But pushing all that data required massive network upgrades, from 2G, which was fine for calls, to 3G in the 2000s, then the big leap to 4G or LTE in the 2010s.
And that cost serious money. Billions upon billions in investment.
And the rollout was uneven. South Korea, Japan, the US, they were quick off the mark.
Whereas many African markets took longer to get those faster speeds. Even by 2018, you had decent 3G coverage in most places globally, but actual usage, especially in developing countries, lagged way behind. Affordability was still a huge issue.
But the smartphones did arrive in Africa, big time, especially when cheaper Android phones started appearing in the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah, phones from companies like Transsion Techno, Infinix names, maybe not everyone knows, but huge in Africa. And Samsung pushing hard too.
So how did MTN and Orange respond? They couldn't ignore it.
No, they had to adapt. They started bundling these affordable smartphones with data plans, made it easier for people to get online.
Right. And they even started experimenting with content. Music streaming, news portals, partnering with the big tech guys like Google and Facebook. Remember Facebook Free Basics?
Oh yeah, controversial, but it did get a lot of people their first taste of the internet, didn't it?
It did. But then you had the OTT players coming in over the top.
WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. Suddenly, why pay your telco for an SMS when you can send a message for free over your data plan?
Exactly. That really hurt the telco's traditional cash cows, especially SMS and international calling revenues, by the mid-2010s.
I bet they weren't happy.
Not at all. They lobbied governments, hey, regulate these guys, make them pay for using our networks. But mostly, the idea of net neutrality held strong. Treat all data the same.
Governments weren't just sitting back, though. Remember the U.S. blocking AT&T from buying T-Mobile in 2011?
Huge moment. The reason. Regulators feared it would stifle competition, meaning higher prices and less choice for you, the customer.
And AT&T had to pay T-Mobile, what, $4 billion just for the deal falling through?
Yep, a hefty breakup fee. Kind of ironic, though, that years later, T-Mobile was allowed to merge with Sprint, leaving just 3 big players in the U.S.
Meanwhile, in Europe, regulators were focused on consumers, too, like getting rid of those painful roaming charges within the EU by 2017.
Great for holidays. Less great for telco balance sheets.
And Europe also led the charge on data privacy with GDPR in 2018.
That was massive. A global standard, really. Forced everyone, telcos, tech giants, you name it, to get serious about handling personal data.
It's also wild how quickly the phone makers themselves changed. Nokia, BlackBerry, Kings of the Hill.
And then, boom, just couldn't keep pace with the smartphone revolution led by Apple and the Android crew.
A brutal lesson in tech disruption.
Definitely. And for MTN and Orange, it meant constantly adapting, partnering with new players, making sure their networks could handle this new world.
But amidst all this global tech churn, something truly unique was happening in Africa. Mobile money. M-Pesa in Kenya, 2007. That's one of the most inspiring parts of this whole story.
It's incredible. Africa essentially leapfrogged traditional banking in many areas. M-Pesa showed the way, then MTN Mobile Money, Orange Money followed soon after.
Suddenly, millions without bank accounts could send money, pay bills, run small businesses, all from a basic phone.
The numbers are staggering. By 2020, sub-Saharan Africa had nearly half the world's mobile money accounts.
It basically turned MTN and Orange into de facto financial institutions. That's a massive shift.
Huge! Mobile money became central to their strategy. It drove revenue, reduced customer churn, and aligned perfectly with government aims for financial inclusion. Orange even launched Orange Bank Africa later on.
A real case of African innovation influencing the world.
Absolutely. And we also saw that global trend of telcos trying to become media companies like AT&T buying Time Warner.
Did MTN and Orange go down that path too?
They dabbled, explored content, digital services, maybe not on the AT&T scale, but they recognized that just being the pipe wasn't the whole future. They needed to offer more valuable stuff flowing through it.
So by the end of the 2010s, the picture is totally transformed from 2000.
Completely. Smartphones are dominant, data usage is exploding, the power is shifted. Vodafone sold its huge Verizon stake, Telefonica refocused, T-Mobile became a real force in the U.S.
And Huawei emerged as this massive equipment player before hitting those geopolitical speed bumps.
Right. And governments everywhere woke up to just how critical these telecom networks are. National security assets.
Though it's important to remember that gap still existed, right? Data usage in Africa, while growing, was still way behind the global average. Affordability and access remained key challenges.
Definitely. Which leads us into the next phase, the 2010s, where things got really geopolitical.
Yeah, the Huawei story really heats up. This relatively unknown Chinese company versus the established Western suppliers like Ericsson and Nokia.
And Huawei's rise was, well, meteoric. They became a leader in network gear, especially for the next generation, 5G. And crucially, often cheaper.
Which made them super popular in Asia, Latin America, and significantly for our story, Africa.
But that success rang alarm bells, loudly, in Washington and other Western capitals. Fears about espionage, state control.
Leading to bans. The US, Australia, Japan starting to block Huawei from critical networks around 2012.
Yeah, and it escalated. The U.S. sanctions on ZTE in 2018, then putting Huawei on the entity list in 2019, cutting off access to key U.S. tech, including Google apps for their phones.
That hurt their smartphone business outside China, big time.
Yeah, and the U.S. started heavily lobbying allies. Don't use Huawei for 5G. Mixed results, though. The U.K. eventually banned them. Others, like Germany, were more hesitant.
Huawei always denied the spying allegations, of course. Argued the risks were the same with any vendor, including American ones.
So while Huawei got largely shut out of the U.S. and some allied markets by the 2020s, they stayed dominant elsewhere. Why? Cost, and often, Chinese state financing helped projects along.
And they were instrumental in building Africa's 3G and 4G networks, right? Working closely with both MTN and Orange.
Hugely instrumental. For many African governments, the priority was expanding coverage affordably. Huawei offered a compelling package despite Western security warnings.
This fit right into China's Digital Silk Road initiative too, didn't it? Investing heavily in Africa's digital backbone.
Precisely. Often with Huawei and ZTE winning the contracts. A clear strategic push.
Okay, shift gears slightly. The 2010s also saw this rising tension between big tech platforms, Google, Facebook, and governments.
Yeah, the techlash era.
Yeah.
Governments pushing back on multiple fronts. Antitrust, tax avoidance, content moderation, data privacy.
Like the massive fines the EU slapped on Google for its Android practices in 2018.
That was a big shot across the bow. And similar antitrust investigations targeting Facebook and others followed. Governments were trying to reassert control.
It wasn't just Europe and the US either. China started cracking down on its own tech giants, and countries like Russia pushing for data localization.
Meaning user data had to be stored within the country's borders. A headache for global platforms.
Plus debates raging about encryption, harmful content. It felt like the tide was turning against unchecked platform power.
And interestingly, European telco bosses found themselves kind of aligned with governments on one point, arguing big tech should pay towards network costs.
The fair share debate, still ongoing.
Still very much ongoing. Big tech obviously pushes back hard.
All this political stuff is happening while we, as users, are changing how we use our phones again. Mobile video explodes.
TikTok, Netflix on the bus, YouTube everywhere. Data consumption goes through the roof again.
And in many emerging markets, the smartphone isn't just a way online, it's the way, the primary access point.
Which brings us back to digital inclusion. Groups like the Alliance for Affordable Internet pushing for lower data costs, governments cutting mobile taxes, efforts to bridge the gender gap online.
And lots of development agencies, even tech philanthropies, getting involved in Africa, funding cables, experimenting with balloons and satellites.
Google Hoon, Starlink, trying different ways to connect the unconnected.
It showed a real global focus, or at least conversation, around bridging that divide. Then, 2020, COVID-19 hits.
And suddenly, reliable internet wasn't just important, it was fundamental for work, school, health info, just staying connected.
Networks saw huge traffic surges. Digital transformation accelerated overnight.
And telcos like MTN and Orange were critical, promoting mobile money for contactless payments, providing essential information. It really underscored their role in society.
Which takes us into the 2020s, the decade of 5G, supposedly, and AI, and more intense rivalries.
Yeah, 5G promised super fast speeds, transforming industries.
Yeah.
But the reality, especially globally, is still unfolding.
China's definitely pushed ahead with deployment, but worldwide, it's patchy.
Very patchy. And in Africa, it's really just the beginning. Early launches in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, but very limited coverage.
So for MTN and Orange in Africa, 5G isn't the main event yet?
Not really. The priority is still expanding 4G, even 3G in some areas. The cost of 5G is high, and the immediate killer apps for the African mass market aren't necessarily there yet.
But there's a vision, right? The African Union has its digital transformation strategy.
Absolutely. Big goals for infrastructure, exploring 5G and AI, Pan-African collaboration through groups like Smart Africa. They're talking about harmonizing spectrum, One Africa network, laying the groundwork.
And that U.S.-China tech battle, still going strong.
Oh, yeah. Huawei developing its own OS, Harmony. A push for alternatives like Open RAN. Countries like India banning Chinese apps, excluding vendors.
It feels like a real tech decoupling, each side trying to become more self-sufficient.
And networks are caught right in the middle. Security concerns remain paramount.
And alongside 5G, there's the rise of AI and worries about surveillance, especially with China exporting AI surveillance tech.
That's a huge ethical challenge. How do you balance technological progress with civil liberties? Different regions, Europe, US, China, are taking very different approaches to regulation.
And telcos, they provide the plumbing for all this data.
Puts them in a complex spot. They have to navigate local laws, data privacy regulations, which are popping up more across Africa now, and growing cybersecurity threats. It's a tightrope walk.
The platform wars aren't over either. Meta's betting on the metaverse.
And new entrants like Starlink potentially disrupting connectivity from space. Though we also see partnerships.
Like the 2 Africa undersea cable. Google, Facebook, MTN, Orange, all involved.
Exactly. Shows that even rivals need to collaborate on fundamental infrastructure sometimes. Building those massive data highways benefits everyone trying to reach customers.
So how are MTN and Orange navigating the 2020s? Sounds like they're being pragmatic. Fast followers maybe on some global tech, but innovators where it counts for their markets.
That's a good way to put it. They're not necessarily first with 5G everywhere, but look at their innovation in business models. Spinning off tower assets to raise cash, doubling down on fintech, even planning to separate mobile money as distinct businesses, diversifying into enterprise services, cloud.
And crucially, in Africa, digital inclusion is still a core growth strategy, right? Unlike saturated Western markets chasing higher revenue per user.
Totally. Expanding the user base, getting more people online and using digital services, that's still fundamental. And they're supported by development frameworks like the World Bank's Digital Economy for Africa initiative.
And customer behavior in Africa? Still a mix.
Yeah, feature phones are still relevant alongside smartphones, so MTN and Orange need services for both. But African users have also leapfrogged in some areas, like mobile money adoption, as we said. They shape the services as much as the companies do.
What about the leadership? Navigating controversies like MTN's huge fine in Nigeria or Orange dealing with political complexities across diverse markets, that takes skill.
Absolutely. Resilience is key. MTN deciding to exit the Middle East and focus squarely on Africa was a major strategic call. Both companies have gotten good at adapting global ideas like telecom banking from Orange's European experience for local needs.
And they're using AI more themselves now for network optimization, customer service.
Increasingly so.
Yeah.
And dealing with rising cybersecurity threats and those new data protection laws across the continent, it's a constantly evolving landscape.
So looking back, this MTN versus Orange rivalry, it's been fierce, no doubt, but ultimately beneficial.
I think you have to say yes. That competition spurred faster network rollouts, more innovation, especially in services like mobile money, and ultimately expanded access for millions. It mirrored those global rivalries, but with its own African flavor.
They pushed each other constantly, even collaborated sometimes on infrastructure, like sharing towers or working on interoperability for mobile money.
Right. And while global forces shaped their journey, Africa wasn't just a recipient of technology. It pioneered things like mobile money that influenced the world. That Lagos entrepreneur using all these tools in 2025, it's a snapshot of this interconnected reality they helped build.
So wrapping this up, the MTN versus Orange story in Africa isn't just about two companies. It's really a lens on globalization, on technology's power, and that fundamental human need to connect.
Exactly. Shaped by those huge global tech wars, but also shaping its own path.
We saw how global rivalries played out locally, how global trends landed, but also how Africa generated its own game-changing innovations, particularly mobile money and digital inclusion models.
It's a story that's still being written, this drive for global connectivity. And competition, like the one between MTN and Orange, remains a powerful engine for progress, hopefully bringing more value and connection to more people.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Behind every app you open, every connection you make, there's this whole complex history of business battles, policy decisions, and technological leaps. Maybe something to explore further is just how far we still have to go on digital inclusion or the sheer complexity of tech geopolitics today.
And just a quick note before we finish, while we've dug deep into this, we're relying on public information. News reports, company statements, public records. We can't know every conversation or private detail behind the scenes.
Absolutely. It's our best understanding based on what's out there.